Hello and welcome to Haunted Places Podcast number 4, the LaLaurie Mansion, Horror in the Big Easy. Now, if you know anything about hauntings in the city of New Orleans, or New Orleans as the locals say, you would know that the LaLaurie Mansion is the house where slaves were tortured at the hands of Delphine LaLaurie. As horrible as that story is, it remains one of the most popular stops on any New Orleans ghost tour, of which there are several. However, so notorious is the LaLaurie Mansion with locals, sometimes people in the city won't even call it that, choosing to refer to 1140 Royal Street simply as the Haunted House. Instead, the fact is, in New Orleans, the two are the same. The haunted house in New Orleans is unmistakably the LaLaurie Mansion. The house was even once featured on the show American Horror Story, among others. And that has already made an infamous location that much more notorious. People claim that the LaLaurie Mansion is, in fact, cursed. And for almost 200 years now, there have been reports of paranormal activity coming from this house, which shouldn't be a surprise that many of the hauntings are attributed to the slaves Madame Delphine kept on the property and who were tortured simply for her amusement. The horrors taking place at the LaLaurie Mansion were eventually discovered by a fire brigade responding to a call, and Madame Delphine's torture chamber was finally put to an end in 1830. Today, in a room where slaves were often kept back in the day, there are often reports of moaning and ghoulish wails of despair. Also, phantom footsteps echo throughout the house with some regularity. Many people who have simply stood near the house have reported feeling as if they were taken over by some sort of negative energy. Despite all the ghost stories and paranormal happenings at the LaLaurie house, it would be folly to assume that all of them can be traced back to Madame Delphine and her mistreatment of slaves. In 1894, a tenant who lived at the LaLaurie Mansion, the house had been converted into apartments at that point in its history. He was brutally murdered in his own room. They found his belongings ransacked as if someone had gone through them, but nothing was missing. Chalked it down to a robbery gone wrong. But more details eventually came out about this grisly murder. When interviewing one of the victim's friends, police listened to him relate his recent conversations with the victim. He claimed that he was having trouble with sprites in his house. Of course, the man being interviewed simply wrote it off to the police as his friend having an overactive imagination. But that was not all that he told the police. His friend also informed him that there was a demon in the house who not only haunted him but menaced him. He claimed to his friend that the demon informed him he was not going to rest until he had met his end, which the victim, of course, did quite horribly. So, is it possible that at least some of the ghostly phenomena that take place in the LaLaurie Mansion can be a result of this brutal murder? Well, certainly a possibility. Or perhaps the mansion is just infected with the evil of Madame Delphine. Past owners, including actor Nicolas Cage, have been asked to allow a medium to come in and communicate with the dead who presumably still reside there, and hopefully get to the bottom of the truth behind the haunting at the LaLaurie Mansion. But to date, none have agreed. The LaLaurie Mansion was also, for a very brief time, a school for girls in the mid to late 19th century. At first, it had been one of the few mixed schools in the city, unusual for pre-Civil War America. However, shortly after the war, 1140 Royal Street was converted into a strictly all-girls, all-African-American primary school. And that's certainly odd, you might say, for the notorious site of tortured slaves. Within a short amount of time, reports of physical assaults at the school came to light. Apparently, young girls would approach their teachers, tears streaking down their faces, with their sleeves rolled up, showing the scratches and bruises on the exposed flesh of their forearms. When asked who had done this to them, the answer was always the same: that woman. These students in 1860, 1870s New Orleans were probably young enough to be ignorant of Madame Delphine and the devastating tragedy of some decades earlier that took place in that very mansion, despite its ongoing notoriety in the city. Moreover, it is unlikely that the teachers themselves would, of course, even tell 6, 7, 8-year-old girls about the starvation and immoral torture of the slaves that took place in their very school. Still, the truth of these incidents, although we can't confirm, the stories do persist. And the story is that some phantom woman had scarred them. This is a widely circulated story about the LaLaurie Mansion, but unfortunately no memoirs exist from this period, only the scattering of accounts here and there. So, was the spirit of Madame Delphine responsible for ongoing tortures, ongoing assaults after her death? Well, who can say for sure? We also have to question whether the spirits of the slaves themselves, who were once nearly starved to death in the house, have they moved on? And if that is the case, who is responsible for all of the ongoing reported hauntings at 1140 Royal Street? Well, that's going to do it for tonight for the Haunted Places podcast. Stay tuned for the next episode, ongoing daily now through Halloween, and sleep well.